My daughter-in-law ordered the most expensive wine on the menu just to prove herself superior. "Enjoy it, you old fool," she sneered loudly. People at nearby tables turned their heads. Then she added, without lowering her voice, "We all know you're just a broke parasite anyway." Forks stopped moving. Glasses froze midair. My son stared down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by it. He didn't say a word. He didn't defend me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stayed silent and smiled. And that smile made them comfortable. That was their mistake. Welcome back to my channel. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and like this video. It helps stories like this be heard. And write in the comments what city or country you're listening from. It always warms my spirit to see how many of us there are. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. That moment, frozen in time, was worth far more than that. My name is Charles Whitaker, and I was sitting at a table most people only choose when they want to feel important. If you could have seen it the way I saw it, you would understand. The white tablecloth was pressed so tightly it looked ironed into place. Heavy oak beneath it. Polished silverware laid out with military precision. Crystal glasses tall enough to catch the chandelier light and scatter it softly across the room. Low jazz floated through the air, mixed with confident laughter, and the sound of money being spent without hesitation. This wasn't a casual dinner. This was a statement. It was the kind of restaurant where prices weren't printed in bold, because the people who came here weren't supposed to ask. Reservations were made days in advance. Jackets stayed on. Voices stayed calm. Everyone acted like they belonged. That night, the reservation had been made by Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. Places like this gave her energy. They told the room she had arrived, that she mattered, that she was winning. For a brief moment, right before she spoke, everything looked exactly the way she wanted it to. Then the words came. They didn't bounce, they didn't echo, they settled. They sank into the space between us and stayed there, thick and uncomfortable, like a stain no one wanted to admit was spreading. I felt them first in my chest, not as anger, not even as sadness, but as recognition. The kind that comes when something you've sensed for a long time is finally spoken out loud. Vanessa didn't look surprised by what she had said. She didn't flinch. She didn't scan the room for reactions. She didn't measure her tone. That told me more than the insult ever could. You don't speak like that unless you're certain the room belongs to you. I let my eyes drift across the table, not toward her, but toward everyone else. People who had been smiling comfortably just seconds earlier suddenly found the wine list fascinating again. Someone lifted a glass just to keep their hands busy. Another shifted in their chair, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor. No one spoke. Not one voice rose to say, "That's enough." And then there was Marcus, my son. He kept his eyes fixed on his plate, like it held the answer to a question he didn't want to face. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched, but his mouth stayed closed. That silence hurt more than her words. I felt the familiar heat rise in my face, the kind that usually comes right before a man explains himself. Years ago, I might have cleared my throat. I might have reminded everyone at that table who I was, what I had done, what I had given up, so people like them could sit comfortably in places like this. But I didn't. because I had learned something over the years. Once people decide who you are, explanations don't change their minds. They only give them more material to twist. So, I sat there. My hands rested near my wallet on the edge of that expensive table. My phone pressed lightly against my palm. Its weight familiar, grounding. Inside the wallet, I could feel the crease of a folded receipt from earlier that day. Groceries, bread, milk, eggs. Simple things. The kind of purchases no one brags about. The kind of life no one applauds. Vanessa mistook my stillness for surrender. I could see it in the way her posture relaxed, in the quiet satisfaction that crossed her face. The insult had landed, and nothing had come back at her. That's when I smiled. Not because it was funny, not because it didn't hurt. I smiled because I understood something she didn't. And to understand that smile, to understand why I stayed silent after that humiliation, you have to understand what had been happening long before we ever sat at that table together. But before that, tell me, have you ever stayed quiet while someone crossed a line simply to keep the peace? If this story already feels familiar, stay with me. And if stories like this matter to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And tell me in the comments, what city or country are you listening from? I read everyone, and it always warms my spirit to see how many of us there are. Now, let me tell you what that moment did to me. The words broke Parasite didn't fade once they were spoken. They hung in the air, thick with the scent of expensive wine and my daughter-in-law's smug satisfaction. Even after she leaned back in her chair, even after she lifted her glass again, as if nothing unusual had happened, the words stayed right where she left them. Uncomfortable, unavoidable. A low murmur spread through the restaurant. At the table behind us, a woman paused mid-bite, her fork hovering, as she whispered something to the man beside her. He followed her glance toward our table, nodded once, then looked away. Near the windows, someone let out a small, awkward laugh, the kind people use when they don't know what else to do. No one wanted to be involved. Everyone noticed. The phrase, "You old fool," echoed just as loudly, even though it hadn't been repeated. It didn't need to be. It had already done its work. Vanessa sat comfortably in her chair, shoulders relaxed now. She took another slow sip of her wine, the deep red catching the chandelier light as she tilted the glass. She looked satisfied, certain. Across from her, Marcus shifted. His fingers tightened around his fork, then loosened. He glanced up for half a second, just long enough to see the attention our table had drawn, then dropped his eyes back to his plate. He said nothing. That silence of his cut deeper than her insult. I stayed where I was, breathing evenly, letting the moment stretch. The tablecloth beneath my hands felt cool and smooth. The soft clink of glass and silverware slowly returned around us as other diners convinced themselves it was safe to continue their evenings. But the atmosphere had changed. I caught fragments of whispered conversations drifting past. Did you hear that? That's her father-in-law? In a place like this? No one addressed us directly. That would have required courage. Instead, they whispered, building quiet judgments over half-finished plates and untouched drinks. Vanessa noticed the attention. I could tell by the way her eyes flicked around the room, not nervously, but with a sense of ownership. Being the center of the room, even for the wrong reason, still fed her confidence. She mistook the silence around her for agreement. She mistook my silence for defeat. The moment she realized nothing was coming back at her, her posture shifted. She crossed her leg, picked up her fork again, and returned to her meal, as if the matter had been settled. That was when I understood something clearly. Respect doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes. It slips away when people stay quiet. When insults go unchallenged. When silence is mistaken for permission. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My wallet rested near my hand. Worn leather, familiar weight. Inside were ordinary things. Old receipts, small reminders of a careful life. Nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention in a room like this. Vanessa glanced at me once more, expecting a reaction. I gave her none. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally understood exactly what this moment was. And I let it settle. 6 months earlier, my life had grown quieter in ways that were easy to misunderstand. The move itself wasn't dramatic. No arguments, no raised voices, just a conversation that ended with a nod and a spare set of keys placed gently in my hand. The little metal ring felt cool against my palm, heavier than it should have been for something so small. They called it the granny flat. A neat space behind the main house, tucked just far enough away to feel separate, but close enough to be convenient. That was the word they used. Convenient. Convenient. For everyone. The first night I slept there, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the uncomfortable kind. The good kind. The kind where you can hear your own breathing and the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I unpacked slowly. Folded my clothes into drawers that still smelled faintly of fresh wood. Set my shoes neatly by the door. Placed my wallet on the small table beside the bed, exactly where I'd always kept it. Habits don't disappear just because your address changes. In the mornings, I made coffee the same way I always had. Measured scoops. Water poured carefully. No rush. I wiped the counter after. Rinsed the mug. Set it upside down to dry. Small routines. Invisible things. The kind no one notices, unless they're gone. From the outside, it must have looked like decline. I drove the same old truck. The engine still started on the first turn if you treated it right. I wore the same jackets I'd worn for years. The elbows softened from use. I reheated leftovers instead of ordering out. I turned off lights when I left a room. I checked prices at the grocery store and kept receipts folded neatly in my wallet. To them, those details meant one thing. He's careful because he has to be. They filled in the blanks without asking. What they didn't see was choice. I had lived long enough to know the difference between frugal and afraid. One comes from panic, the other comes from peace. Vanessa noticed the habits first. Not openly, not at first, just small looks. A raised eyebrow when I declined takeout. A smile that lingered a little too long when I brought home groceries instead of delivery bags. Comments framed as jokes. "You don't have to live like that anymore," she'd say. "We've got you covered." Covered, the word, stuck with me. Marcus echoed it later, though his tone was gentler. He asked if I was comfortable, if I needed anything, if the space was warm enough at night. I told him the truth, that I was fine, that I had everything I needed. He nodded, relieved, comforted by the idea that the roles were clear. As weeks passed, patterns formed. They left early most mornings. The house grew quiet again after the door closed. I kept to my routines, swept the floor, took out the trash when it was full, paid attention to small repairs before they became big ones, tightened a loose hinge, replaced a light bulb. Simple things. In the evenings, I ate early, simple meals, plate at the small table near the window. The same chair, the same view of the backyard fence, catching the last light of the day. From time to time, Vanessa would glance in, checking on me the way people check on something they assume is fragile. She'd ask if I needed groceries, if I was managing, if the heater was working properly. I always said yes. I always said I was fine, and I was. But each time I said it, something shifted slightly. Not in me, in them. Assumptions harden quickly when they go unchallenged. I noticed the way conversations changed. Decisions made without including me. Plans discussed openly, as if my presence didn't require consideration. My opinions acknowledged politely, then set aside. None of it was loud. None of it cruel. That's what made it dangerous. Disrespect doesn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes it shows up quietly, wearing the mask of concern. I kept my wallet where I always did. I kept my phone charged. I checked accounts the way I had for decades, out of habit, not fear, numbers steady, balances where they should be, bills handled. I said nothing, because silence had always served me well. I had learned over a lifetime that the less you announce, the more people reveal. When you don't rush to correct assumptions, you get to see exactly how others truly see you. And what I saw over those months was simple. They saw an old man who had moved in because he needed help. They saw someone slowing down, someone shrinking, someone dependent. They didn't see intention. They didn't see restraint. They saw what they expected to see. And by the time we sat down at that dinner table months later, those assumptions had settled in so deeply that Vanessa felt comfortable saying what she did out loud, in public, without hesitation. That dinner didn't change how they saw me. It confirmed it. I went to bed that night in the granny flat the same way I always did. Lights off, door locked, wallet pulled carefully on the table. Beside me, phone set to charge. Quiet. At the time, it felt like just another evening. I didn't yet realize how much that quiet had been buying me. What people rarely understand is that quiet doesn't mean empty. It often means full, just not on display. I didn't grow up believing money was something you talked about. In my world, you handled it. You respected it. You didn't let it control your mood or your mouth. You let it sit quietly in the background, doing its job. That mindset stayed with me long after my working years ended. I woke up at the same time every morning. Not because an alarm told me to, but because my body had learned the rhythm. Coffee brewed slowly. No rush. I read the news on my phone, scrolling past headlines without urgency. Then I checked my accounts. Not out of worry, but out of habit. Numbers where they should be. Bills already scheduled. Nothing blinking red. That was the life they never saw. Vanessa assumed frugality meant limitation. She saw me choosing store brand items and thought it meant sacrifice. She saw me driving an old truck and assumed it was necessity, not preference. She saw me wearing the same coat year after year and thought I was holding on because I couldn't let go. She never considered the possibility that I didn't need to prove anything. I had learned long ago that real security doesn't announce itself. It doesn't change how you speak or how you treat people. It simply removes the panic from your decisions. When you have that kind of security, you stop chasing impressions. You stop buying things to impress rooms you don't respect. You stop mistaking noise for value. My life had become simple by design. Groceries were planned. Meals were modest. Utilities were monitored without obsession. I knew exactly how much came in and how much went out. And I had for decades. There was comfort in that clarity. No surprises, no scrambling. And yet, to Vanessa, simplicity looked like lack. She filled the silence with assumptions because silence made her uneasy. People who rely on appearances often do. When there's nothing flashy to point to, they create their own explanations. I noticed it in small comments. You don't need to worry about money anymore. You've earned the right to relax. We'll take care of you. Each sentence sounded kind on the surface. But underneath it all was a quiet conclusion. You can't do this on your own anymore. I never corrected her. Not because I didn't hear it. Because I did. I understood something she didn't. Once people believe you're dependent, they stop treating you as an equal. And once that happens, words stop working. So I let the image settle. I let them believe I was careful because I had to be. I let them believe the quiet life meant a small one. I let them believe I was living within limits someone else had set. Meanwhile, I continued exactly as I always had. I kept records neat and simple. I kept backups where they belonged. I reviewed statements the same way some people review weather forecasts, calmly, regularly, without fear. I didn't talk about it because I didn't need to. Security doesn't need witnesses. The irony was that my restraint made them bolder. The more I declined offers to upgrade my lifestyle, the more convinced Vanessa became that she was right, that her success had outpaced mine, that the balance of power had shifted. She wore confidence the way some people wear jewelry. On the outside, meant to be noticed. She measured success by the places she could sit comfortably and the bills she believed she could handle without flinching. I let her have that belief because I had learned another truth over the years. When someone thinks they're in control, they reveal everything. Their expectations, their limits, their assumptions. They stop being careful. And Vanessa had stopped being careful long before that dinner. She believed the story she'd told herself. The one where she was the provider. The one where I was quietly grateful. The one where my restraint meant reliance. That story made sense to her. It just wasn't true. I went on living my quiet life, checking my phone each morning, folding receipts, keeping things simple. I listened more than I spoke. I watched patterns repeat themselves. And in doing so, I learned exactly how far their assumptions went. Far enough that, when the moment came, they wouldn't see it coming. There's a difference between helping someone once and quietly holding things together for them over time. The first kind gets remembered. The second gets taken for granted. I never announced what I was doing. There was no conversation where I sat them down and explained anything. No speeches. No conditions. Just small decisions made early in the morning. The kind no one notices because they don't create noise. Most days started the same way. Coffee first, phone unlocked, banking app opened. Not because I was worried, because that's what responsible people do. I scanned balances the way a pilot scans instruments, calmly, methodically, looking for anything out of place. Nothing ever was. The mortgage payment showed as pending, then cleared. Utilities scheduled, then marked paid. Internet, water, power, handled quietly, without alarms or late notices. The system worked because I kept it simple. The trick to helping without being noticed is labeling. A transfer wasn't called support. It was labeled HOA. Another was utilities reimbursement. Groceries became household expenses. Neutral words, boring words, the kind people glance at once and forget. Vanessa never questioned them. Why would she? The amounts were modest. The timing consistent. And consistency breeds trust. When things run smoothly, people assume they always will. I noticed the relief it gave Marcus, even if he didn't realize where it came from. The way his shoulders loosened over time. The way conversations about money stopped happening altogether. Bills stopped being discussed because, from his point of view, there was nothing to discuss. That's the thing about quiet support. It removes friction so effectively that people forget it ever existed. Groceries appeared in the fridge more regularly. The lights never flickered. The internet never slowed down. Repairs happened before they became problems. Small comforts returned to the house, and no one questioned how. Vanessa attributed it to progress. She believed things were improving because they were doing better, because she was doing better, because her choices were finally paying off. I didn't correct her. I watched her confidence grow the way unchecked weeds do, fast, bold, and unaware of what's happening underground. Sometimes, I'd notice her scrolling on her phone at the kitchen counter, tapping at a calculator app, frowning slightly, then relaxing again. Numbers have a way of telling the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. But the truth she saw was incomplete. She saw expenses covered. She saw stability. She assumed ownership. The reality was quieter. I kept copies of everything, digital and paper, statements downloaded monthly, receipts folded neatly and filed, nothing dramatic, just discipline practiced over years. When you live that way long enough, you stop feeling the need to explain yourself. You know where you stand. You know what you can do. And you know when to stop. I noticed the shift in Vanessa's tone as the months passed. It became sharper, more confident, less patient. Gratitude faded quickly when it wasn't reinforced. Comments turned casual. You don't need to worry about bills anymore. We've got everything handled. Just enjoy retirement. She said it kindly enough, but there was an edge to it now. An assumption. A quiet ownership over things she hadn't built. Marcus said less and less. He seemed relieved not to talk about money, which told me more than words ever could. Avoidance often hides anxiety. I let it continue. Not because I didn't see where it was going, because I did. Support, when invisible, becomes entitlement. And entitlement, left unchecked, always grows louder. Every payment I made, every bill I covered, every quiet transfer added another layer to the illusion they were living under. That illusion made Vanessa comfortable enough to believe the house stood because of her. Comfortable enough to believe she could speak the way she did at that dinner. One evening, as I sat at the small table in the granny flat, I reviewed the month's expenses. The numbers lined up cleanly, as they always did. No surprises, no red flags. I paused for a moment longer than usual, not because anything was wrong, because something was clear. Support is meant to stabilize, not replace respect. and respect had been missing for longer than I'd allowed myself to admit. I closed the app, set my phone down, folded the latest receipt, and placed it back in my wallet. Everything in its place. Everything still under control. I didn't feel angry. I felt resolved. The quiet help I'd been giving wasn't invisible anymore. Not to me. And once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. I turned off the light, locked the door, and lay down in the familiar silence of the granny flat. At the lawn, it felt like just another night. Looking back, it was the last night I believed quiet support alone was enough. They called it a celebration. Marcus's birthday. That was the excuse, anyway. For Vanessa, it was something else entirely. A stage. A chance to be seen in a place like this, surrounded by linen tablecloths and soft lighting, where money spoke quietly but confidently. She had chosen the restaurant days earlier, made sure the reservation was locked in, dressed for the room, not the occasion. Everything about that night felt deliberate. From the moment we sat down, she was performing. She didn't even glance at the prices. When the server listed the specials, she interrupted halfway through and asked for the market price lobster. Then the wine, one of the most expensive bottles on the list. Not because she loved it, because it made a want. Each order landed like a small jab, a reminder of who she believed was in control. Marcus smiled politely, nodded along, said very little. He looked proud in the way people do when they think they're supposed to be. Like this was what success was meant to look like. A good restaurant, a full table, no visible worries. I watched quietly. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, glass in hand, enjoying the rhythm of the evening. She spoke loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, laughing at her own comments, soaking in the attention that came with being confident in a place like this. Then came the toast. She stood just enough to be noticed, raised her glass, cleared her throat. "To my husband," she said, smiling wide, "who works so hard to support everyone in this house." A brief pause, just long enough, including the dead weight. There it was. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded casual, practiced, as if she'd said them before, just not out loud. A few people glanced over. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Marcus froze, glass halfway to his lips. Vanessa wasn't finished. She laughed lightly and continued listing my so-called crimes like they were jokes. Using too much hot water. Small things. Petty things. The kind of complaints people save up when they want to feel justified. Her voice carried across the room. Every word was a reminder of how she saw me. I sat there, hands still, expression unchanged. Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel personal, even though everyone could still hear. "Honestly," she said, "you're just a broke parasite, living off our hard work." Then she leaned back, satisfied. The silence that followed was heavier than anything she'd said. It pressed in from all sides, from the tables nearby, from the people pretending not to listen, from the staff moving a little more carefully now. I looked at Marcus. My son stared down at his plate. Not a word, not a glance. That was the moment something shifted. Not into anger, into clarity. I understood then that the patience I had practiced for years had done its job. It had shown me exactly how far things had gone, how comfortable Vanessa had become, how silent Marcus had chosen to be. The illusion was complete. They believed the story they'd been telling themselves, that I was dependent, that I was grateful, that I would endure anything as long as the peace held. They believed that there would be no consequences. I stayed where I was, calm, quiet, still smiling. Inside, a decision settled into place. The night wasn't over yet. Vanessa took my silence as permission. That's how it always happens. When disrespect isn't challenged immediately, people assume it's been accepted. They mistake restraint for agreement, endurance for approval. She settled deeper into her chair, crossing one leg over the other, glass balanced easily in her hand. The performance was over in her mind. The line had been crossed, and nothing had pushed back. That was all the confirmation she needed. She glanced around the room with the confidence of someone who believed she'd won. Nearby tables had gone quiet again, conversation returning in cautious bursts. The discomfort she'd created was fading, replaced by the familiar hum of people trying to enjoy their evening without getting involved. Marcus finally lifted his head. He offered a small, uncertain smile in my direction, as if that alone might smooth things over. Not an apology, not a defense, just a look that said, "Let's move on." I gave him nothing. My smile stayed exactly where it was, calm, unreadable, untouched by the moment. I didn't lean forward or back. I didn't reach for my glass. I didn't shift in my chair. I simply watched. Vanessa mistook that smile for surrender. She leaned toward Marcus and said something under her breath, the corner of her mouth lifting. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Her expression said enough. Relief, satisfaction, control. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for it. She had rehearsed arguments in her head, and when none of them arrived, she relaxed. People do that when they believe the danger has passed. The server returned to the table, careful now, eyes moving between faces, sensing the tension that still lingered. Vanessa ordered dessert without hesitation, waved away the suggestion of sharing. Another small declaration of authority. Marcus nodded along, playing his part. He checked his phone briefly, then set it face down on the table, as if to signal he was present. Again. Back to normal. But nothing was normal. I felt the familiar weight of my wallet near my hand, the smooth leather worn from years of use. My phone rested against my palm, screen dark, quiet. No notifications, no alarms, everything exactly as it should be. That calm was what unsettled her most. Vanessa glanced at me again, longer this time. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching for something. Anger, embarrassment, anything she could use to reinforce her version of events. She found none. "So," she said lightly, tapping her glass with her fingernail, "should we get the check?" The way she said it assumed an answer. Marcus looked up quickly, then back down. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The assumption hung there. We'll handle it. Vanessa smiled again, confident. She had already decided how the night would end. They would pay. I would sit quietly. The balance would remain exactly as she believed it to be. I nodded once, barely noticeable. "Whenever you're ready," she added, waving a hand casually. The table around us seemed to exhale. The worst part, everyone thought, was over. The insult had been delivered. The silence accepted. The story concluded. That's the danger of thinking in straight lines. My smile never changed. Not because I was pretending. Because I was waiting. Waiting doesn't require movement. It requires patience. And patience, I had learned, is often mistaken for weakness by people who rely on noise to feel powerful. Vanessa leaned back again, already distracted by something on her phone. Marcus adjusted his napkin, folded it once, then again. like he was trying to give his hand something to do. I stayed still. In moments like this, people reveal their assumptions without saying a word. Vanessa assumed I had nowhere to go. Marcus assumed the night could still be salvaged. Both assumed I would continue playing the role they'd written for me. They were comfortable. That comfort wasn't accidental. It was earned by months of silence, restraint, and careful observation. I looked around the table one last time, taking in the polished surfaces, the half-empty glasses, the untouched cutlery. Everything appeared settled. Nothing was. And as the idea of the check began to take shape in Vanessa's mind, I let my smile linger, calm, steady, and completely misunderstood. The silence that followed was deafening. My son, my own flesh and blood, just stared at his plate. Not a word, not a glance in my defense. That silence said more than anything Vanessa had spoken all night. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The quiet patience I'd cultivated over years finally reached its limit, not snapping into anger, not boiling over, but settling into clarity. Clean, certain. The unspoken subsidy was over, and so was their illusion of control. My son's silence was the loudest sound in the room. That was when I knew. It was time to pay the bill. In more ways than one. The check arrived, folded neatly, inside a black leather folder, and was placed gently at the edge of the table. The soft thud it made against the linen felt heavier than it should have. Vanessa glanced at it once, barely interested. Marcus leaned back slightly, as if the night had finally returned to safer ground. From their point of view, this was where the story ended. I reached forward calmly and pulled the folder toward me. That small movement was enough to make Vanessa pause. She didn't speak at first, just watched, her eyes following my hand with mild curiosity, like someone observing a harmless mistake. I opened the folder slowly. The total sat there in clean black numbers. $800, food, wine, dessert, tax. $800 for one dinner. Not an exaggeration. Not a tome. The kind of amount people remember. The kind that turns assumptions into risks. Vanessa smiled faintly. "You don't have to," she began, then stopped herself. The smile sharpened. "We've got it." I looked up at her once, briefly. Then I reached into my wallet. Not with hesitation, not with uncertainty. Just a steady, familiar motion. I pulled out a card and placed it gently inside the folder. It wasn't the worn debit card she expected, not the one she had already decided defined me. This one was different, heavier, cool against my fingers, metal. The kind of card you feel before you recognize. The air around the table changed. Vanessa's smile froze. Not completely, just enough to betray surprise. Marcus leaned forward now, eyes fixed on the folder, his breath shallow. The server returned and reached for the check. He glanced down, then back up at me. His posture shifted instantly. Not dramatically, just enough. Shoulders straightened, voice steadied. "Of course, sir." "Sir." Vanessa blinked. "Is that—" She hesitated, then tried again, quieter this time. "Is that fake?" No one answered her. The server took the folder and walked away with purpose. No questions, no hesitation. The silence that followed was different from before, sharper, unavoidable. Vanessa shifted in her chair, lifted her glass, then set it down untouched. Marcus swallowed hard, eyes flicking between me and the space where the server had disappeared. I remained still. My phone rested against my palm, screen dark. My wallet lay open on the table. Unremarkable. Again, now that its work was done. Minutes passed. They felt longer than they were. Somewhere behind us, silverware clinked. A laugh broke out at a nearby table. The restaurant continued as if nothing had changed. Everything had. The server returned and placed the folder in front of me. "All set, sir." I nodded once. Inside, the receipt was printed neatly. $800 total sat there, final and undeniable. The line for the tip waited. I picked up the pen. Vanessa leaned forward, unable to stop herself. "You don't have to do that," she said quickly. "Really? This was—" I wrote calmly. "A number, another 0. I signed at my name without pause. Then I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. The server accepted it with a respectful nod. "Thank you, sir." He walked away. This time, the silence wasn't awkward. It was stunned. Vanessa stared at the table, then at me, then at Marcus, trying to reconstruct a reality that no longer fit. Her confidence wavered, just for a moment, before disbelief took its place. Marcus didn't speak. He couldn't. The bill, the very symbol of the knight's power, had been handled without discussion, without permission, without noise. I folded the receipt and placed it back inside my wallet. Everything returned to where it belonged. I stood slowly, not to leave yet, just to stand, and for the first time since the check arrived, I looked directly at Vanessa. She opened her mouth to speak. I raised a hand gently, not to stop her, but to signal that the night was not finished. When I stood, the chair legs scraped softly against the floor. The sound wasn't loud, but it sliced through the silence that had settled over the table. Vanessa looked up at me immediately, irritation flashing across her face, as if I'd broken an unspoken rule. Marcus straightened too, confusion tightening his expression. I adjusted my jacket slowly, smoothed the front with one hand, took a steady breath. Then I spoke. "I paid this bill, Vanessa," I said calmly, "because it's the last thing of yours I will ever pay for." The words landed clean. Vanessa blinked, then laughed once, sharp and forced. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "What does that even mean?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence do the work. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You're trying to make a scene now? After everything we've done for you?" "For me," I repeated softly. She scoffed. "You live on our property. We cover the household. Marcus works himself to the bone. And now you want to act like some kind of hero because you paid for dinner?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Vanessa," he muttered, unsure. She waved him off. "No, I want to hear this." I met her eyes. "You've heard it." Her smile faded. "You don't get to talk like that," she said, her voice tightening. "You should be grateful. Most people your age would what?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "Would know their place?" I finished. Her jaw clenched. "Don't twist my words." "I didn't," I replied. "You said them. All night." Vanessa glanced around, suddenly aware again of the room, of eyes that had drifted back toward us. She straightened in her chair, trying to regain control. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is just dinner." I nodded once. "That's exactly why it matters." Marcus finally looked at me. "Dad, let's just go. Home," he said. "We can talk about this later." I looked at him then, not angry, not disappointed, just steady. "There is no later," I said. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "You can't just decide things like this." "I already have." She laughed again, but there was no humor in it this time. "You think paying one bill changes anything? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I think it ends something, I said. The table went quiet again. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She searched my face for doubt, for hesitation, for the familiar softness she was used to seeing. She didn't find it. I reached into my jacket, not in a hurry, and slid my wallet back into place. The receipt was already folded. Finished. The conversation was done. Vanessa stared at me, realization beginning to replace disbelief. I gave her one last look. Not cruel, not triumphant. Final. I didn't sit back down. There was no need. Vanessa was still staring at me, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and irritation, as if she expected the moment to correct itself. Like the room would suddenly laugh. Like someone would step in and explain that this was all a misunderstanding. Nothing happened. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. That was when the air truly shifted. Phones mean action. They mean records. They mean permanence. Vanessa noticed it immediately. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone sharper now. I unlocked the screen calmly. No rush, no shaking hands. The same way I'd unlocked it every morning for years. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Dad, can we not do this here?" "Here is exactly where it needs to be done," I said. The app opened with a familiar blue and white screen. Account overview. Balances listed cleanly. No alerts. No warnings. Vanessa scoffed. "You're trying to scare us with numbers now?" I turned the screen slightly. Not toward Marcus, but toward her. "This account," I said, tapping once, "is the emergency fund you've been using for the past 2 years. Her smile faltered. "That's ours." I shook my head gently. "It never was." She leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" I scrolled slowly. "Names, permissions, access history, dates." "You were authorized users," I continued, my voice steady. "Not owners." Marcus's face drained of color. "Dad." I tapped again. Access removed. The screen refreshed instantly. Vanessa let out a short laugh. "You can't just—" Another tap. Cards frozen. The confirmation message appeared at the top of the screen. Clean, official, unemotional. Her laugh stopped. She grabbed her purse, fingers moving too quickly now, pulled out her wallet, and stared at it like it had betrayed her. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice had changed. I didn't respond. I scrolled once more. "Your auto payments," I said, "were tied to the same account." Marcus swallowed hard. "Dad, please." I tapped again. Auto pay canceled. Mortgage, utilities, insurance. All grayed out. All inactive. The room seemed to contract around us. Vanessa stood abruptly, chair scraping back. "You can't do this," she snapped, her voice rising. Heads turned again. "That money was never yours," I said quietly. She shook her head, hands trembling now as she flipped through her phone, opening apps, tapping frantically. Her confidence had evaporated, replaced by something raw and urgent. "This is insane," she muttered. "This is... Marcus, say something." Marcus stood halfway, then sat back down, torn. He looked at the table, then at me, then at Vanessa. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence returned. Different now. Vanessa tried to steady herself, inhaled sharply, then grabbed her phone again. "I'll fix this," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "I'll just—" She turned and hurried toward the bar. Stayed where I was. From my place by the table, I watched as she spoke quickly to the bartender, card in hand, gesturing sharply. I watched the bartender, Swipe it. Once. Then again. Then shake his head. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened. She tried another card. Same result. Declined. Marcus stood then, finally moving, rushing toward her, his voice low and urgent. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the panic in his posture, the way his hands moved, the way his head dipped it toward hers. The illusion collapsed in real time. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and picked up my jacket. The receipt from dinner sat folded neatly inside my wallet, right where it belonged. As I waited, I took one last look at the table, the glasses, the plates, the untouched dessert. Everything looked the same. Before the story continues, take a moment and think about this. How many times have you stayed silent, hoping respect would come back on its own? If this moment hit close to home, stay with me. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so stories like this don't get lost. You're not alone in this, even when it feels that way. I stepped toward the exit, the cool air from outside brushing against my face as the door opened. Behind me, the voices were raised now, frantic, uncontrolled. I didn't turn around. Some lessons don't need witnesses. The restaurant didn't feel the same anymore. What had been warm and confident just minutes earlier now felt exposed, like a room after the music stops, and everyone realizes how loud they'd been. Conversations around us dipped and rose again, cautious, curious. People tried not to stare. Some failed. Vanessa stood near the bar, her phone clenched in her hand, tapping the screen again and again, as if repetition alone might change the outcome. Her posture, once relaxed, commanding, had collapsed inward, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, breath shallow. Marcus hovered beside her, his voice low, urgent. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read them in his gestures. Apologies, please. Questions without answers. Vanessa shook her head sharply, hair falling forward as she leaned closer to him. Her lips moved fast now, sentences tumbling over each other. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was damage control. A bartender leaned slightly toward them, speaking quietly, professionally. Vanessa snapped something back, then stopped herself, forcing a tight smile that fooled no one. She tried another card, declined. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final. Her hand dropped to her side. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the bar as if it had personally betrayed her. The confidence she'd worn all evening had drained away completely, leaving behind something raw and exposed. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, then stopping. He looked back toward our table, toward me, then away again. The choice to stay silent earlier now pressed on him from all sides. He had nowhere to put it. Vanessa turned sharply, scanning the room, eyes landing on familiar faces that now looked away. People who had overheard the insult, the tension, the collapse. The room had shifted its judgment, and she could feel it. She walked back toward the table quickly, heels striking the floor harder than necessary. "This is insane," she hissed, leaning in, careful not to raise her voice again. "You embarrassed us, in front of everyone." I didn't respond. Marcus stood behind her, eyes tired now, stripped of confusion. "Dad, please," he said quietly. "Can we just go?" Vanessa spun on him. "Go where?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea what just happened?" Her voice cracked on the last word. That was the moment I saw it. Not anger, not arrogance, but fear. The kind that comes when certainty disappears. When the ground you thought you were standing on turns out to be borrowed. She looked back at me, searching my face for something. Pity, hesitation, regret. She found none. The table between us felt vast again, polished. Cold, untouched desserts sat where they'd been placed. Forgotten. Glasses half full. A scene paused mid-motion. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said, softer now. "I know," I replied. Marcus swallowed. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally spoke. "I didn't think it would go this far either." I nodded once. Silence returned, heavier than before. Not the silence of shock, the silence of consequence. Vanessa straightened slowly, smoothing her jacket as if that might restore something. Her movements were smaller now, restrained. She glanced around one last time, then grabbed her purse with a sharp tug. "We're leaving," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Marcus followed her, hesitating for half a second before turning away. He didn't look back. I remained where I was for a moment longer, letting the room settle, letting the collapse complete itself without commentary. Sometimes, endings don't need words. They need space. I didn't rush. That was the first thing. While they moved quickly, Vanessa tugging at her purse, Marcus following a step behind, I stayed where I was for a moment longer. I slid my chair back under the table carefully, straightened the napkin I hadn't used. Small habits. Familiar motions, the kind that keep you steady when everything else feels unsettled. The restaurant continued around me. A couple at the far end laughed too loudly. Glasses clinked. Someone asked for the check at another table. Life didn't pause just because a reckoning had happened nearby. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair and slipped it on slowly. The weight felt grounding. Familiar. I checked my pockets out of habit. Wallet, phone, keys. Everything where it belonged. At the entrance, Vanessa was already halfway out the door, her voice sharp and hurried, as she spoke to someone on the phone. Marcus lingered just inside, torn again, looking from her to me. "Dad," he said quietly. I met his eyes. There were 1,000 things I could have said. Explanations, justifications, even comfort. I chose none of them. I nodded once. That was all. He hesitated, then turned and followed her outside. I waited until the door closed behind them before I moved. The air inside felt different, now lighter, somehow. The tension that had filled the room earlier had dissipated, leaving behind only curiosity and the faint echo of what people would later describe as something uncomfortable they witnessed once. I walked toward the exit at my own pace. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, crisp and steady. The city hummed softly around us. Traffic in the distance. Voices drifting down the sidewalk, the low rhythm of a place that never truly sleeps. Vanessa stood near the curb, pacing now, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp, clipped, frustration spilling through each word. Marcus stood a few feet away, hands on his hips, staring down at the pavement. Neither noticed me at first. I stopped a short distance away, just long enough to take it in. Not with satisfaction, not with regret, with clarity. Then I turned. I walked past them, without slowing, without comment. My shoes hit the sidewalk in an even rhythm. One step, then another, the street light cast long shadows ahead of me, steady and unchanging. Behind me, voices rose and fell. I didn't look back. Some exits don't need announcements. They speak for themselves. I didn't go home right away. I walked. A few blocks, no destination, just movement. The city felt different at night, less interested in appearances, more honest. Streetlights hummed softly. A bus passed with tired faces behind fogged windows. Somewhere nearby, music drifted out of a late-night bar, muffled and distant. I checked my phone once, out of habit. No notifications, no panic, everything steady. That steadiness was the point. For a long time, I had believed that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping respect. I told myself that silence was maturity, that patience was strength, that if I stayed calm long enough, people would eventually remember who I was. That night taught me something clearer. Silence is not weakness, but it isn't endless either. There's a difference between choosing quiet and being erased by it, between helping and enabling, between restraint and surrender. I had crossed those lines slowly, without realizing it, because I thought love meant absorbing discomfort without protest. It doesn't. Love doesn't require humiliation. Respect doesn't need permission. And dignity doesn't ask to be noticed. I thought about the months in that small space behind the house. The routines, the folded receipts, the payments made without thanks, the careful way I'd kept everything running so no one would feel strain. I realized something else then. When you carry people quietly, they stop feeling the weight. And when they stop feeling the weight, they forget who's holding it. That night, at that table, when I paid the bill and stood up, I wasn't making a statement about money. I was ending an arrangement that no longer respected me. Money kept the lights on, but respect decided who stood where. I didn't feel victorious as I walked. I felt lighter. The kind of lightness that comes when you stop pretending everything's fine just to keep others comfortable. Some people mistake calm for compliance. They mistake age for dependence. They mistake silence for permission. They're wrong. The quietest person in the room is often the one who understands the situation best. The one who has prepared. The one who knows exactly when to act and when to stop paying for someone else's certainty. I reached my car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The dashboard lights glowed softly, familiar, reliable. I adjusted the mirror, set my phone in the holder, and took one last breath before pulling away from the curb. The road ahead was clear, and for the first time in a long while, so was my position in the world. If this story spoke to you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. And if you're comfortable, share where you're listening from, city or country. It reminds me how many of us are walking similar roads, quietly. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.